Welcome back to Fast Market here on the TD Ameritrade Network. Let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment, and that's going to be Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at LikeFolio. Happy International Women's Day, Megan. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited.
All right, so we're talking BJ's Wholesale. It's had a good run over the last year, up about 24%. What kind of data are you guys seeing? It seemed like Costco fell post-earnings. You know, one of their competitors, this is BJ's is on a smaller scale, but Costco's rebounded from that sell-off we've seen. What kind of data do you guys have on BJ's Wholesale?
Yeah, so whenever we look at BJ's, we do compare it in the same pot as like a Costco and like a Sam's Club. But when we look at just overall momentum in terms of consumer buzz growth and also consumer demand growth, we see BJ's with a bit more momentum. And a lot of that has to do with, this is the smaller player in the field. I think BJ's has around 240 locations, whereas Costco is pushing over 850. So you can see that this is a name that has plenty of room to grow. And that's definitely one of the avenues that it's trying to push into right now is expand into more states. I think right now they're in about 19 states, but they're opening new locations pretty aggressively this year. And we're seeing that start to move the needle, at least in our data. And a lot of this is driven because consumers are increasingly turning to companies like BJ's for these deals, especially whenever you're talking about food prices. Whenever we look at the macro trend picture overall, we see food price concerns that are really top of mind for consumers. Those mentions are up 64% year over year. And we see consumers, looking to try to find these deals, and that's something that BJ's offers. I think that, they tout that their food prices are 25% below industry average, but what's really nice is in our data, we can actually see this starting to trickle through in terms of that value perception from consumers when we look at those consumer happiness levels. And so BJ's consumer happiness has risen by about 8 points year over year. And so for us, any type of a move by 8 points in a single year is pretty significant. So to give scale, this happiness level is still lower than Costco. From a competitive standpoint, Costco still sits at the highest level when it comes to overall levels of happiness, but BJ's is making significant improvements. And when we look at the tweets themselves, what's driving this, a lot of it is this perceived quality and people talking about, turning to BJ's to find better priced produce, and also just noting that they're expanding their availability of fresh produce. So these are some nice signs that we see going into earnings that BJ's is growing as expected.
Megan, they claim their third quarter was their most profitable quarter in their history. They make over 50% of their money off gasoline, so they're a big gasoline seller. They said they had their best year ever in gasoline. They are talking about supply chain problems and higher prices and their inability to get really great prices. But the biggest thing that jumps out at me is this is really an East Coast company, isn't it? There's no BJ's around the Midwest where Tom and I live. It's really an East Coast. Is this company growing substantially? Is it coming to the Midwest, or is this one of those regional competitions for Costco?
Yeah, I think that right now it's regional, but that could just be for a short time. One thing that they touted, I know they're opening a store in just outside of Nashville. So you're looking at states like Tennessee, like Georgia, like Florida, which could be a tremendous market for them. And, we're starting to see this move the needle when we look at purchase intent. We saw growth look a little bit flat in the quarter that's about to be reported, but we look at this new quarter, which incorporates a lot of these new store openings and people being really excited and maybe signing up or discovering a BJ's for the first time. In the first quarter, which started in February, I believe, those mentions are up by more than 40% year over year. So that's a big boost, and a lot of that is driven by these new store openings. So I think that this is a really important driver moving forward for BJ's to continue to expand, but they certainly do plan to expand. And it's nice to see that as purchase intent increases, as buzz increases, that we see this happiness rising alongside that. That's not necessarily something that we always see when we look at our data, to see a rise in you have a larger pool of customers, and on average, that larger pool is happier. So for us, from a long-term signal perspective, this looks really nice.
I wanted to look at the mentions count chart that you've also brought us, Megan, and that's one of the concerns because you mentioned all the positive data that you guys are seeing, but when you see the stock price starting to move up above those mentions, even though, the mentions have been solid year over year, right? Is that a
Yes.
concern going into this report? And especially now that gas prices are, they're still elevated, right? But we don't have that pandemic type feeling as far as gas prices go that we did last summer when crude was or gas prices were over $5. So will that temper maybe some of the gains here?
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's kind of why I wanted to feature this mentions chart, is because you can see how growth of consumer metrics like mentions compares to its stock performance, and you can see that for us this tells us that expectations are pretty high. Last quarter they had a really nice earnings report. I think they beat on the top and bottom lines. They raised their full year guidance, and shares were rewarded. And now we're seeing still very high expectations. Mention growth is still there. Demand growth is definitely popping here in the first quarter, but at least in the quarter that's about to be reported, it might be just online, and so we're not sure, will that be enough? Our score, I will say comparatively, is a little bit higher than Costco's, but still falls into the neutral range. But I think that, you could make a case, it's right on the edge from a bullish perspective. So you could make a bullish case, but just noting that those expectations are really high. And, as they're opening new stores, that comes with the cost too. So to take that into account, that, that's something that LikeFolio data can't take into account, is just, the cost of growth.
Cost of growth. I think throw up four sides to a building, throw a roof on it, and stick stuff in there on pallets. I mean, it shouldn't be that much for BJ's. All right, great stuff as always, Megan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, you too. That's Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at LikeFolio, breaking down the data points here.